Hello, everyone, and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Rock Gaswal, and I'm filling in for Tim tonight. Joining me on the panel are experts from Nebraska Extension. Answering the insect questions is Fred Baxendale. Greetings, Fred.
Good evening.
Tree and weed questions go to Bill Kreuzer.
Hey, everybody.
Rots and spots will go to Lauren Giesler.
Always great to be here, Rock.
Answering your horticultural questions will be Kelly Feehan.
Good evening, all.
If you have gardening questions, we'll help you'll join us too. Just dial 402-472-1212 in Lincoln or toll free at 1-800-676-5446. Our email address is byf@unl.edu. Emailed questions will be answered on a future show. And please tell us as much information as you can, including where you live. During the week, you can follow Backyard Farmer on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Backyard Farmer website. Before we get to your question, let's take a look at a few simple samples.
Yeah.
You got a simple sample?
I do.
You're a simple entomologist.
Actually, this is a fairly complicated sample, but no, this is hackberry psyllid galls, and they're very common in our landscapes right now. Sometimes they're referred to as hackberry nipple galls because of the shape, and it's sort of interesting. The adult looks like a miniature cicada, and what happens is the adult lays its eggs under the skin of the leaves. The nymphs, when they hatch, as they develop, they produce these distinctive galls. The nymphs continue to develop throughout the summer, and in the fall, the adults emerge. Those adults can become a nuisance in our landscapes and in our homes when they seek overwintering sites and invade our homes. They can easily pass through our window screens because of their size, and so they're often a pest inside the house. Once inside, the best thing to do is just use a little bit of an aerosol to get rid of them, or wait for them to die. So, hackberry psyllids, generally not much we can do at this time of year. If we're going to try to control them chemically, we need to do that in the spring, just as the eggs are being laid when the leaves are beginning to leaf out. So,
Thank you, Fred. Bill, returning from Whistling Straits in the PGA Championship.
Yep.
You didn't pull that out of one of the fairways, did you?
There was some there, that's for sure. This is the classic example of when something can be a weed or a desirable plant. And this grass you might see in patches or bunches in your lawn, and it may look a little different, a little softer, kind of like a feathery appearance. And this is creeping bentgrass. And so creeping bentgrass in the lawn is a weed. But it's a desirable species in a high-end golf course fairway and most of our golf course greens, especially here in Nebraska. And so this can be difficult to control because we don't have a lot of easy control options. It's a grassy weed. When it gets in there, it will slowly grow and kind of take over. It's kind of distinctive because it has stolons instead of rhizomes. So that means it has these stems that creep along the tops of the soil and put out new leaves. And so here's kind of a close-up view of what those stolons would look like, where you have the crown back here and then these above-ground stems growing along the top of the soil and then putting down new leaves and new plants. And so it can be kind of a challenge in our lawns. There are a couple herbicides out there that we can use. We can always use a non-selective herbicide and try to kill this creeping bentgrass, or we can use something like Tenacity, which is a newer herbicide, and you require multiple applications to help kill this particular, in your lawn, weed, but on a golf course, a very desirable plant.
Thank you, Bill. Lauren, what do you got for us there?
Well, in the spring, everybody really enjoys lilacs, but this time of year, a lot of people see lilacs and they see this, which is kind of this powdery dust over the leaves, which is powdery mildew. And a lot of different species in the landscape we'll see powdery mildew on. We'll see it on turf many times early in the season. We'll see it on lilacs late in the season. We'll see it on phlox, for example, really popular. There's other things that really consistently we'll see this powdery mildew. And I guess the question always is do you manage it or not? And so, this time of year, there's a lot of stuff going on as far as diseases and things, and usually they're too far along to really do much management. So I really wouldn't encourage any management. And then also, in general, you don't see a lot of loss from powdery mildew in general in the landscape. It's more of an aesthetic problem. So you really have to decide, if you're going to try to control that or not. If you do, you can use some things that are, in the backyard landscape, many products can work. The sulfur products, even something simple, even like a chlorothalonil or an organic spraying milk or something. You can do things like that, but you really don't have to. So if you can live with it, I would just do that, enjoy the flowers in the spring, and then just have a little bit of powdery mildew in the fall.
Thanks, Lauren. Kelly, usually this is a big horticulture sample, and I'm looking at something kind of small there in front
The
of you.
smaller one that I have here. I have a shrub that everybody will probably want to plant in their landscape, especially if they like to make jam and jelly out of fruit. But this is the common name is black chokeberry, not choke cherry, but black chokeberry. And the scientific name is Aronia melancarpa. And this is just a very nice shrub in the landscape. It's got very nice looking glossy green leaves. And in the fall, I know this isn't a great example, but it's just starting to turn color, so it'll have really pretty vivid orange in the good fall color years, but it pretty consistently colors up. But that gives you a sense of the fall color that you'll enjoy. And then, of course, the berries, Aronia berry is probably most people are familiar with that because they're very, very healthy. But they're called chokeberry because you probably don't want to pick them off the shrub and pop them in your mouth because they are very stringent and they almost need to be made in jelly or jam. But I've had it, it's delicious. And choke cherry used to be my favorite jam, but I think chokeberry is now my favorite jam. But this is a very nice shrub. There's a number of cultivars out there. One that comes to mind is Iroquois Beauty, which is a little bit smaller one. That one probably only gets about 2 to 3 feet tall. The species itself can get about 4 or 5 feet tall, maybe even 6 feet in a year like this with all the rain. But a very nice shrub for the landscape, and it has the added benefit of being an edible plant.
That's always good. Mm-hmm. Fred, we're going to take a look at a picture here. And
Okay.
this is from Hortville, Nebraska. This beetle is on our rhubarb, melons, and sweet corn. Can you please identify it, and will it be harmful to our plants?
Well, that's a green June beetle, and these are highly attracted to fermenting fruit and ripening overripe fruit. And so they can actually come in and damage and feed on the developing fruit and cause a fair amount of damage. It's interesting that the immatures of those are grubs, scarab grubs, and they feed in our turf sometimes and can cause some problems, but they're often also feeding in high organic matter or, again, on the roots of various types of plants. In terms of control, probably the thing you need to do is you can treat the adults with something like permethrin or Sevin and control them if needs be. But perhaps the most important thing to do is to pick up any dropped fruit. That dropped fruit continues to ripen and becomes highly attractive to these beetles. So
All right, thank you, Fred.
cultural is probably the best way to deal with it.
Cultural. So, thank you, Fred. Bill, they live in central Nebraska, and they want to take a look at these grasses from 2 photos. We have fescue grasses in our lawn and have found patches of this type of grass. Is it good or bad, and will it hurt anything in the lawn, or should we, in the words of Lauren, rogue it out? Her words exactly.
Wow, nice.
There's a following out there.
Yeah. Based on that picture, I think it looks like a yellow nutsedge. Is that what you're thinking too? It's actually not a grass, and so the adage we go by to identify it is sedges have edges, and so if you roll it through your fingers, you'll feel it's got a triangular stem. It's a perennial warm season, so if you have a problem there, it's going to continue to be a problem because it has these little nutlets or tubers in the soil that helps it to survive and regenerate in the following year. Pulling and roguing it out really isn't an option because it has rhizomes in those tubers, and if you pull it out, it will just generate more plants from that. So it's really a challenge to try to control this. We have a graduate student in our program right now that is studying yellow nutsedge control in biology, and he's finding that there are some herbicide options that can be effective, but not this time of year. You really have to get on it early in June when it's starting to warm up, and that's when these plants are small and we get better control with the yellow nutsedge.
Thank you, Bill. Lauren, here's a picture of a tomato, and I'm not sure where it's from, but apparently it's looking green with some, the fruit itself is green with some black flecks. Any idea?
Yeah, and so unfortunately, when they took the picture, I didn't really get a close look at the spots, but I'm just going to talk about a few things that can cause spots like this on tomatoes, assuming that it's not a ripening issue. If it's a ripening issue, a virus could cause that, and if they see the start of growth on the plant, they may see that type of reaction. The spots on there, you could have several things. It could be even something like anthracnose, it could be bacterial leaf spot. So I'm just going to do a general and say try to avoid overhead irrigation, try to avoid any splashing on the fruit, clear out any diseased leaves or leaves that you see with spots on them at this point in the season. You really, at this time of year, you're probably going to have quite a bit of leaf damage. If you're seeing a lot of spots on fruit, it's going to be hard to manage. So just try to clean it up and get that canopy open so that fruit can have some air circulation. And again, at this point of the year, that's what I would do with it.
Thanks, Lauren. Kelly, this viewer is from Macedonia, Iowa, which is 60 miles east of Council Bluffs, so more further away from Omaha than Council Bluffs. And they have an autumn blaze maple that was compromised in the last year's hailstorm. And they're asking whether it will recover. Would there be an expectation it would recover? She says there is damage all the way into the cambium layer of the tree.
Okay. Well, I mean, the foliage itself looks healthy. And if you can get a little bit closer look, it looks like there is cambium, or what we call callus tissue, I should say, that's starting to grow and close that wound. Whether this will affect the tree long-term or not is probably more that time will tell. Because once you have that wound, that opens up that tree to a variety of issues. Possibly cankers could have infected that wound, and you just don't know it yet. And the tree could live for a while longer yet before a canker disease, for example, would start to cause it to decline. So, and it is an autumn blaze maple, and we do have issues with those. So just the fact that it's just an autumn blaze, it may not bode well for the tree. But right now, as long as you're getting that callus tissue, it looks like that wound is starting to close over. The foliage is green and healthy. You're not getting twigs dying back. That's all a good sign that maybe the tree is dealing with the wounds, the hail wounds, and it will recover. But the issue with hail sometimes is, as I said, that's an opening in the tree where you can get, a secondary infection like a canker disease, and sometimes it's 3-4 years down the road before you know whether that's an issue or not, and then the tree will start to die back.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Gardening doesn't have to end at harvest time. You still have plenty of time to get a fall crop planted. For our first feature tonight, Elizabeth Killinger helps us with tips on fall gardening.
Now is the perfect time to start your fall vegetable garden. When we take a look at our fall vegetable garden, we need to make sure that we have adequate amount of space to plant these crops. When we go to the garden center, we want to pick out crops that are about 60 days or so till harvest for those tender crops, and you can get a little bit longer window for those cool season crops. So some of the tender crops are like your beans that you can still plant. Some people are actually planting basil right now. Some of the cool season crops that you can actually do a second crop with right now are going to be your Swiss chard, your beets, your spinach. You can actually do some lettuce, peas, and then radishes. So those are some of the cool season crops. When you go to the garden center, on some of the packets, it will actually tell you when you can put in the spring crop and when you can put in the fall crop. And so you want to read on there to make sure that you're following all those label instructions on there. When it comes to fall vegetable gardening, you want to make sure that you plant the seeds a little bit deeper than what's recommended on the package. And the reason for that is right now the soils are warmer than normal, so that gives you a little bit of extra time to let those seeds germinate. Also, you can put them a little bit closer together than what's recommended on the seed packet. And again, the soils are warmer than normal. That way they can germinate and you'll have a good crop. So once you get your seed packets, what you want to do is you want to prepare your soil and make sure that that soil is really nice and worked up and it's fluffy. And so that way when you lay out the lines or you lay out the seeds in the garden, you make sure that those seeds have every opportunity to germinate. Then what you want to do is make sure that you give them adequate amount of moisture. And remember, we're in the heat of the summer, so they might require a little bit more moisture than what your spring crops did. So that way they can poke up through the soil and that soil doesn't crust over. Some of the crops that we have out there can actually be held over from the spring. What we have is we have some broccoli and we have some kale that was planted this spring. And both of those are either slow to bolt or is able to handle the heat of the summer. So these two can be left in the garden all year long, and then when you want to do your second crop or your fall crop, you can interplant in between those crops. So that gives you multiple seasons of interest with those two crops. And then with the other ones, what you want to do is you want to plant in there, make sure they're well watered, and enjoy the vegetables.
As your summer garden fades and you're cleaning up, there should be some good space available to get those crops into the ground. Elizabeth always does a really nice job, considering she's in the middle of the state. I don't know what that would have to do with anything, but it just sounded semi-intelligent. We'll try again next time. We're going to take a look at some other pictures here, Fred. This is in Hastings. We noticed this creature resting on a 4x4 post in the shade on Monday afternoon. Sounds like a pretty smart creature. And wondered what it might be other than some type of moth. Any information you could provide would be greatly appreciated.
Well, it is a moth, obviously, and look at the size of it. You can see it's 2.5 inches approximately, so it's a large moth. I shared this image with our resident lepidopterist, Steve Spomer, in the Department of Entomology, and he identified this as a 5-spotted hawk moth. So many of our viewers will actually recognize the common name of the caterpillar, which is a tomato hornworm. So that's a very common pest that we see on tomato in our gardens. I went looking for one in my own landscape, my own garden, couldn't find any, unfortunately. I was going to bring one in. So 5-spotted forester, 5-spotted hawk moth. So in terms of control, obviously there's no control necessary for that moth. It's probably an important pollinator, in fact. But for the caterpillars, if you have the hornworms in your garden, simply pick them off and step on them or drop them into some soapy water to dispose of them.
Well, thank you, Fred.
No need to spray.
No need to spray. That's good news. Bill, this is a person from, let's see here. I'm sorry, I don't know where they're from, but this is what this weed is, and will putting down preen in the fall help to control it in the spring?
Yeah, that looks like common chickweed. You can tell it's not mouse-eared chickweed because the leaves are more round, whereas mouse-eared is going to have more of an elongate and leaf, and it's going to be a little bit hairier. And this is actually a summer annual, and so it can overwinter in isolated areas that are warm, maybe protected, because it has a little bit of winter cold hardiness, but for the most part, it's a summer annual. And so, putting on preen, there's different types of preen. There's a pre-emergent preen, there's a post-emergence preen. If you want to really, make sure it's dead going into this fall, any of our 3-way type herbicides will do a really good job of controlling this weed. And then, most of our pre-emergent herbicides will work in the spring if you have a real bad issue with this in the future.
Thanks, Bill. This is from Gretna, Nebraska. Lauren, a couple of my tomatoes are spotted on one side and perfectly fine on the other. These spots are also hardened. Most of the tomatoes are fine, but it's just a few of these happen to. Any thoughts?
Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind when I saw that. Actually, the first one was stink bug,
Right.
Fred, or viruses. And so based on the pattern on there, though, I kind of thought it might be stink bug.
It might
What do you
be.
think? And they'll, way I understand it, please comment.
So what the stink bugs do, when they feed, they insert their mouth parts and they inject a little salivary toxin, and it causes that hardened site on the tomato. So again, in terms of control, you could use Sevin or almost any other product to control them. But the first thing to do is go out and, in fact, see if there are stink bugs. If there are that many lesions, that's just a fairly heavy stink bug population. And we do have brown marmorated stink bug now in Nebraska. So it could be one, and that you might want to take around to the county extension office.
Well, if you don't see stink bugs, then a virus could do that, and you would tend to see that in the fruit, actually. If you split it, you're not going to see a consistent pattern in the fruit. You're going to see some distortion in there. So it would kind of give you an indication of what it is.
Yeah, so the viewer needs to do a little bit more investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. Kelly, this people from Schuyler, they have a tree in their front yard, and it looks like a half ornamental flowering crab and a half some sort of crab. and it's there when they purchase the property. They want to know if the apples are edible.
Well, they are edible. They're not toxic or anything such as that, but they may not be real tasty. Now, the larger ones almost look more like an apple, so you almost wonder if it was one of those trees where they tried to graft, different cultivars within the same tree. But maybe not. It could be an issue where it's reverting back. Maybe it was a cultivar, a cultivated variety, and maybe it's reverting back to the rootstock or just reverting back to something else. But to answer the basic question, you can taste them. The larger ones might be a little, crab apples are tart, but might be a little bit tastier. But again, that might be a good one to make jam out of.
Great jelly. Yeah.
Great jelly.
Great jelly.
Edible, but doesn't taste very good.
They may not taste very good.
Okay.
I mean, you can
They're
eat it
tart,
if you
but
put
you
a
can eat
lot
it.
of work
Yeah.
into it. You can eat it. That's
Add
what
a lot
that
of sugar.
Don't eat
translation
it.
is, yeah.
But it's edible. Sometimes we get questions about leaves turning colors and other odd things. That might be an indication of pest damage or a disease, but sometimes it's just normal plant growth. For this week's Green and Growing tip, Tara James shows us some examples of yellowing leaves that are normal for new trees.
We've been getting a lot of questions in the Backyard Farmer email about some of their trees and shrubs looking a little chlorotic. We've actually come out and started looking at some of them, and really they're not chlorotic. They're actually putting on some new growth, as in this tree right here. It's a little more light than the green leaves that came out early in the spring. Really, you don't want to do anything with it. You don't want to add any fertilizer. You don't want to prune it. Just let it be. It's just kind of sending out a new flush of growth. So make sure that that tree is well watered if we do go into any kind of dry spell throughout the next part of the rest of the summer. If it's super hot, maybe give it a little bit of a drink. But please, just go ahead, enjoy it. It's some new growth on your tree, and enjoy it into the fall.
It's part of being a good gardener to check on the health of your plants and trees. With this tip, it's good to know the difference between a problem and normal plant growth. Hey Fred, we're going to go for questions without pictures.
Okay.
So no cheating on these.
No cheating.
Will Tempo, the insecticide Tempo,
Right.
work to kill spider mites on blue spruce?
Sure. Is this a lightning round?
Well, would you like? Normally you
Yeah,
elaborate,
I mean,
so I'm not really sure how to take that.
For spruce spider mite, probably my first choice would be bifenthrin. Is probably maybe the most effective product, but Tempo is labeled for spider mite control, and it should work reasonably well. One of the problems when you get to something like Tempo is that it also kills off all the natural enemies and the predatory mites that might be there, so you can end up with a buildup later on in the season.
An option other than Tempo that wouldn't kill the beneficials?
Well, the bifenthrin probably would be a better choice.
Okay. I bet they have some Tempo on the shelf.
Yeah, I'm
probably.
sure they do. One thing with any older pesticide, and that's an older product, make sure it's reasonably fresh. When you look at the bottle, and if you shake it and there's particulate matter, there's crystals in there, that's the active ingredient, that's precipitated out. So you don't want to use that.
So much for the speed round.
You did it.
I know I did. It was my fault. I was egging him on, and it worked. Bill, describe what a person should do in Schuyler to correctly seed a lawn this fall.
If you're looking to seed into a lawn that it's brand new, you tilled it up and you're ready to go. You want to get good seed to soil contact first. So, get good seed. Actually, that's the first thing. We always grab good seed and get seed that has a calibration for your spreader you're planning on using. And then when you put the seed down, you till it level and smooth, seed into that, put on a starter fertilizer, and then do some watering. If you're doing a smaller seed like a bluegrass, you're going to water a couple more, maybe 3 or 4 times a day. A tall fescue, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. It's a bigger seed, doesn't need as much frequent of water. And then the other trick is, don't let the grass get too tall before you start mowing it. It's a big problem a lot of homeowners have, is let the grass get 6 inches and then they'll scalp it down to 2 inches, and it really causes a lot of harm on those seedlings. So we had a bunch of segments this year on how to seed in the spring, and we can use a lot of those same techniques in how to seed in the fall. So look at our YouTube site and review those videos.
All right, thank you, Bill. Lauren, these individuals have what they believe to be brown patch on their lawn, and is a fungicide worth the expense and trouble to get it down?
Well, I think right now with the temperatures we have, I would say no, as long as it stays cool. If it gets warmer and we start seeing those night temperatures in that 75 range again, then using a fungicide is going to be helpful. But in any event, if you have some thinning, and I can tell you I have brown patch in my yard, and a lot of times I'll just overseed and fill that in. So you can get away without it. It just depends on how far you want to go and how much quality you want to sacrifice. So if you really want to control it, a fungicide's good, but make sure you're paying attention to temperature because it will not be active if you're not approaching those over 70-degree nights.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. These individuals purchased their home in like 2009, and they get the soil wasn't very good, as you can imagine, in relatively new construction. When we get dry and we get into stressful conditions, the grass stresses as do some of the other plants. And they're a little concerned about the water bill and everything else. Any ideas on how they might improve their soil since they now already have an established landscape?
Oh, with an already established landscape. And I assume they're talking shrubs, trees, around, not a lawn.
No, they were talking lawn.
They were talking the lawn. So how come you didn't give the question to Bill?
Yeah.
No, I guess, to improve the soil, the one thing I always recommend, and Bill, you can pipe in too, but core aerating to relieve compaction. That's probably key. Leaving your grass clippings, because as those decompose, they'll add a little bit of organic matter. And some people, after they core aerate, some people do recommend putting on a very, very fine compost and just putting that over and raking it in so it kind of sifts down into those aeration holes. And for the lawn, that would be the best thing to do. If you do have some trees and shrubs, more of my area, put a ring, about a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch around those trees and shrubs. And over time, that mulch will decompose and hopefully help the soil as well.
I think that the compost thing is definitely something we can do in the turf. It's just the amount of bulk that's required is pretty high. If you're talking about thinking about how much area there is in thousands of square feet.
Right.
But if you're doing it routinely over and over and over, that could be a way to help to improve those soil physical properties. And some active research that we're doing here at Nebraska to figure out ways that we can do that to improve the soil through amendments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. Our garden has come a long way this year, from practically being underwater to start the growing season to looking gorgeous as the summer comes to a close. Before we take a break, let's take a minute to visit the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we have our master gardeners out here tidying up again this weekend. And we are looking at some nice, most wanted rain for this week. So we're really looking forward to not having to water everything. We are also still in that planning stage for looking at what we liked this year, what we didn't like, and what we're planning on next year. We're also looking at deadheading a lot of things that we really don't want to have seed itself merrily throughout the garden. Fennel and dill are two of the things that we are really making sure that we cut back those seed heads so that we don't have that all over the place. However, the Johnny Jump Up violas, we are letting them seed themselves about because they are so cute and nice color in the spring when they first come up. We're also looking at harvesting all those cherry tomatoes and tomatoes. We do have some orange tomatoes, so make sure you remember what you planted and when they're going to be ripe, so you pull them off the vine at the right time. That's what's happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden.
It's time for a short break, but stay with us. We've got the plant of the week, the lightning round, and more of your questions. There's more Backyard Farmer right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. You still have time to get your questions answered. Just give us a call at 1-800-676-5446. Later on in the program, we'll visit Raising Nebraska, where we'll see Kim and the crew battling the weeds. But right now, it's time to start the lightning round. Dun, 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 dun. You ready, Kelly?
I'm ready.
All right. I need to move a 6-foot white pine. When and should I hire a professional?
6 foot tall. You can move it in September, and yeah, hire a professional. That would be better than doing it yourself.
My bleeding heart dries up after it blooms. How can I stop it?
You can't. That's normal.
When should I prune quince for good flowers?
I don't know.
How do
I
I
can't
tell?
remember what age wood it blooms on.
How do I tell when squash and pumpkins are ripe?
Oh, the thumbnail test. Press on it with your thumbnail, and if your thumbnail doesn't puncture the rind, it's right.
Why would radishes go to tops every year?
Planting them too close together, you may need to thin them out. Planting too late in the year in the heat. I'd try thinning.
Why do my pole beans all have foliage? I didn't fertilize.
What type of pole beans are they? So
I'm
maybe
assuming
the soil's
beans on a
just very
pole.
fertile.
Can I still plant fall vegetables?
Yes,
And that wasn't fair. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
You're asking me, the turf guy, a bean pole question? You ready, Lauren?
I am absolutely ready.
Good. I had fungus on turf this year. Will I get it next year?
Maybe.
Do I
Depends on the
need
weather.
do I need to move my potato patch if I had potato scab? Excuse me.
Scab, you can. It's going to be hard to manage though because it's a fungus that's in the soil that's going to survive. So you can rotate it, but you're still going to have it.
Can I still eat peaches that have browned around the pit?
Sure.
What can I do next year about spots on my pear leaves?
You can get into an early season spray program. If this is a fruiting pear, look at the fruit tree spray schedule.
Is there a disease that causes cedar twigs to die, and what to do?
Yes, there's actually a quince rust that gets on the twigs, and so the best thing to do with that would be prune that out and use some sanitation. And then next year, if it's severe, you could look at trying to treat at the time when those are going to be moving over in May.
Should I plant? Oh, I was going to say, can I still plant walnut trees in Nebraska? But I was halfway through the question. You can still
Walnut
put it in?
trees? Sure. I'm not the person to answer that.
I know. I don't know what this. Once again,
1,000 cankers.
1,000 cankers, you could get it, but I don't believe there's any disease that's going to wipe us out for the most part. I mean, I'd try anything.
okay. Bill, ready?
Yep.
Is it time to seed, and how many weeks do I have in Sidney, Nebraska?
It is time to seed, and you have until probably the end of the month, I would guess.
When can I control nut sedge with sedgehammer?
Too late, just in the spring, early June. Mow it down.
When is the best time of day to water the grass?
In the morning.
Should you aerate before or after you fertilize?
I don't think it really matters.
Should I use fescue or bluegrass in a spot that doesn't drain?
I would go with the fescue because you probably will have issues with the powdery mildew.
Can I buy buffalo grass seed, and should I seed it in the fall?
You can buy it, but I wouldn't seed it. So I would do that in the spring. It's a warm season grass. Seed it in the spring.
Where can I purchase clover seed netting?
Online?
Online, really?
I don't know.
I don't write the questions.
Good
Okay?
answer.
I think the turf guy was helping the turf guy.
Of course
There were
I
a lot of
will.
yes and no answers.
Kind of like Kim helps the horticulturist, but I'm just saying.
I elaborated on a couple.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Does Spectricide Bagabug work for Japanese beetles?
Not very well.
Will zucchinis produce fruit if I don't see any pollinators?
If there are no pollinators, no, but there's plenty of pollinators.
Do squash vine borers overwinter close to the infected plants?
They overwinter in the soil, so fairly close. So good fall sanitation is important.
Will fall tilling plus an insecticide kill squash vine borer larvae?
Well, they overwinter as adults and away from the crop, so not a good question.
That's a no.
No.
Where can a preventative insecticide be started in spring for squash vine borers?
Gosh. Probably in June.
Do borers and oak overwinter here?
Yes.
And you've got 6 seconds, and I don't have any more questions.
Oh, wow, I guess I win.
I don't think that's fair.
Is it
Now it's Kelly's time for Plant of the Week.
Gladys's plant of the week?
And before we do that, though, Fred should have had one more, so I don't think there's, I didn't have enough questions. Sorry.
Well, I graciously accept.
That
Fred
you
wins
want.
by default.
Okay.
Okay, on to plant of the week.
On to Plant of the Week. Let's go.
Okay, this plant of the week, the top one, the kind of the fuchsia colored one here is one of the celotias. The common name is coxcomb. It's one of the crested types, and these are an annual, and many different colors, but red, yellow, orange, and then of course this kind of this fuchsia pink. And these can be dried and kept for the winter. You want to hang them upside down. They're fairly thick, so it takes a while to dry them out. Sometimes people have trouble with them molding. So you want to make sure they're good and dry before you use them. The foliage here is perilla. And Gladys says this is probably the most, I think she used the word invasive plant that she's ever seen. It has thousands and thousands of seed, but it's fairly easy to rogue it out since it is an annual. But it's grown for its foliage, this purple foliage. These plants can get quite large, but they really make a nice contrast, especially here with the purple with the fuchsia colored celotia, coxcomb celotia. And I guess this is actually used as an herb in Japan. I think she said it was called chizo, and they'll use it in their tobacco, dry it and use it in their tobacco.
Interesting.
But a pretty combination, so thank you, Gladys.
Fred, this individual wants to know, are there plants you can plant in your backyard to deter mosquitoes?
There's a mosquito plant. It's one of the mints that supposedly will repel mosquitoes, but basically, no.
Bill, should you apply Roundup while the grass and weeds are tall or after you mow to be most effective?
Generally, we say to do it not right after you mow, because you want that leaf foliage there to absorb a lot of that Roundup to be most effective.
Lauren, these individuals have a cottonwood tree in their front yard. What could cause some of the leaves to turn black?
Cottonwoods will get a leaf disease. They get Marsanina leaf spot is one of the common ones that'll get them black. There's a couple different fungal diseases. That's one I think of right now. I wouldn't worry about it too much, though. It's going to be a foliar disease. It's going to be insignificant in general, unless you're trying to establish a tree. If you were trying to establish a young tree, then you might look at some sort of a fungicide application. But in general, I wouldn't worry about managing a leaf disease on a cottonwood.
Is that the same one that aspen get?
I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I struggled with my aspens. I lost a lot of them.
When they're young, but cottonwoods are so resilient in general. I'd be surprised to see it. Now, if they're starting one, though, that's where you could do a foliar fungicide application in those early years. But once they get to a critical size, they're going to be fine.
Okay, thanks. Kelly, they have two old English oaks in Kearney in their front yard. They're about 20 feet tall, very healthy until this year. Seem slow and leaf out very sparse compared to all other trees, all other years. Both seem to be dying now. Leaves are grayish green and turning brown. No insects apparent. What could have happened?
Okay, well, English oak is a pretty hardy tree, and it's a good tree to select. So, without seeing it, I guess I'll fall back on possibly it was injured by our cold temperatures last November. I know we're blaming that on a lot of unexplained tree issues, but it could have happened. I mean, trees, it was suddenly cold and trees were not fully dormant, so that cambium layer was actually injured. That's one possibility. But I think you might want to call your local extension office there and have them come out and look at them or take some samples of the leaves in.
All right, thanks, Kelly. We're going to do a series of pictures here, y'all.
Okay.
This one's for you, Fred. Pictures from Columbus. This is corn. It's half dark brown and half tan with dark spots. Oh, there's an insect they found in their compost pile. Wow, never mind. And it's about the size of my thumb. And there's a quarter in there for scale. And what is it? Is it harmful? They couldn't find any more of them. This is the only one they found.
Well, Rock, in my 30 years on Backyard Farmer, this may be one of the most interesting specimens that we've seen, one of the images. This is a Madagascar hissing cockroach. They are native to Madagascar, which is a tropical island off the east coast of Africa. And the only way could have gotten here was it was placed there one way or another. It was brought here. So in Madagascar, they're important foragers. They keep the jungle floor clean. So how it got there, uncertain. I'm not overly concerned about it because being from a tropical area, they in fact would not survive a Nebraska winter. So it's going to die. But how it got there, somebody had to have moved it there, brought it there. It might have been a student, maybe one of the kids.
Hard to say.
Yeah. So,
Interesting.
But somebody put it there.
Okay. Bill, and this is kind of it might be a pathology one, but we're going to let you take a look at it. I live in York, Nebraska. 2 spots on my lawn that will start to die while the rest of the lawn is just fine. I'm sure they have enough water. Or if I make sure they have enough water, I can revive the area. I've had soil samples and still no answer.
It's tough to tell really what that is. It looks kind of like brown patch to me. I like to kind of know what the species is, if it's tall fescue, if it's bluegrass. If it's bluegrass, it could be fighting some summer patch, and that would explain the water response. If it's tall fescue with the weather we've had, it's more likely to be some brown patch. Those would be my 2 best guesses. They're both, like Lauren was saying earlier, prevalent when it's hot, especially the warm, humid nights that we've been having this summer. And so a better option, even if it is summer patch, the watering might help keep it alive, but really wet feet, wet soils will help to promote that pathogen. So everything.
Those are probably the main things, yeah. The other thing, I don't know if we can get that picture back up, Rock.
Can we get
There's
that
a
picture up?
tree in that picture that actually has a nice example of a girdling root.
Oh, yeah.
And if that was my landscape, I would get rid of that root, because long term, that's going to give you some trouble. I would work on that
Yes.
more than the turf.
More than the turf. Nice observation. So we'll stay with you. We have these toadstools in our yard. They started either under a linden or ash tree. I'm not sure of the tree. They seem to increase each year. I pull them up every day, and the next day they're just as thick. Is there any treatment to get rid of them?
There's not any treatment to get rid of them, and I believe if they said ash, this is an ash tree bolete. I believe. Actually had a student in our department. I worked with this quite a while a day looking at it different times, and that's what we came up with. So just remove them. One good thing is they're not highly poisonous, so at least in the records. So you don't have to be quite concerned with some of them that are really poisonous as far as kids or pets and those kinds of things. But unfortunately, with fungi like that, when they're producing those fruiting structures, there's not really anything you can do. Over time, they'll break down the debris, but if it's associated with the ash tree, probably as long as you have the ash tree, you're going to have the ash tree blowleats. Just enjoy them. As Fred says, it's one of nature's marvelous pageantries, and just kind of go with that. It's a mushroom. They're pretty. They're just like flowers.
They are.
Okay. Kelly,
Okay.
we have 2 viewers actually, and they're describing pretty much the same thing. You're going to see a picture there. They describe these as Freddy Krueger appearance leaves. And they want to know whether it's from too much or too little water on tomato.
Okay, well, without being there, it's tough to say, but if they have to, most people know if they haven't been watering enough. So, and the fact that they're up against the foundation, I'm guessing that it could be too much. It could be too much water. It could actually be either one, but check the soil. It could be too much water. But if there's a downspout or something nearby, because it's right up against that foundation, and with all the rain we've had this year, if you're in a location where there's been as much rain, I know some areas are drier than others, but it could be that the soil was saturated, and that will cause yellowing of the leaves. There's a wilt disease too. It kind of looked like maybe one of the verticillium or fusarium wilt diseases as well. So next year you might want to buy a cultivar variety that's resistant to wilt or rotate to another location.
Well, and they could check for wilt real easily just by cutting those stems and seeing if there's any discoloration inside. If there's not, I wouldn't worry about that.
And as
Thank you
far as
both.
is the soil too dry or too wet, check it. Stick a screwdriver in there or dig a little bit out with a trowel, and you'll usually can tell.
No matter what situation you have in your landscape, sooner or later you're going to have some weed problems. That's never more true than when you're putting in a new landscape. Kim and the gang out at Raising Nebraska in Grand Island are struggling to keep the weeds down, and she'll tell us what they are doing about it.
We get a lot of questions on Backyard Farmer about weed control, and we tend to talk a lot about it when it's weeds in the turf, weeds in established landscape beds. What we don't really mention is weeds in newly constructed or newly planted or newly plowed sites. So here we are at Raising Nebraska. We're going to talk about weeds on steroids. From July 21st until today, this is what you get for pigweed and barnyard grass from pretty much nothing. So we have a couple of choices, and of course chemicals are always one of them if people choose to go that route. Backpack sprayer or a handheld sprayer on a day when it isn't windy, which is pretty much an impossibility on an open site. That allows you to direct the spray. A nozzle that will throw a pattern that is long and low will be helpful, but you really do have to read directions on whatever you choose to use for weed control, as well as make sure that that wind is not terrible. We don't really like to use chemicals. We don't use them much in the Backyard Farmer Garden in Lincoln. Here at Raising Nebraska Outdoors, we will do some chemicals because we probably are going to have to. This is an acre site. But in the meantime, we have been watering our crops and watering all of our garden spaces, so many of the weeds just pull right out of the ground. And good gardeners, of course, are the ones that have dirt under their fingernails, or if they have fingernails at all. So the pigweed, the barnyard grass, a lot of these big ones, we're going to go ahead and pull. We will weed whack or mow the rest of them. What I want to note, though, is how many of these weeds have germinated from this tilled or turned soil. They've come through our mulch. We don't recommend using landscape fabric, especially in a landscape bed. We have lots and lots of problems with weeds coming up through the fabric, and you have to pull the weeds, the fabric comes up. You can end up with soils that are either incredibly dry or incredibly wet. So we don't have fabric under our mulch. We did use newspaper under the paths at the Backyard Farmer Garden, the Vasco Garden on campus. That has worked really well, and that is something that does degenerate over time or break down over time. So you'll see a difference in the weeds against the walls. The bigger ones, of course, are pretty well established. If the soil is moist, they'll pull right up. You see different things, the grassy weeds coming up in kind of this sandy clay soil here. Again, it's really important to understand the difference between winter annual weeds that'll be germinating, set seed, croak. You can do a pre-emerge late in the fall on that, or to understand the perennial weeds. And the perennial weeds, like the bindweed, et cetera, are the ones that really cause people a lot of heartburn. So we'll be doing actually mechanical cleanup out here. We will be remulching. We are likely to use Snapshot, which is preen on steroids, to be able to help with some suppression from the pre-emerge standpoint. So you'll see a lot of weeds. You'll see them thrown in a place where they can compost so that they don't regenerate new weed seedlings when we come back next year.
Sometimes it takes a little work and sweat to get those weeds under control, especially in a new landscape. And sometimes that's the only option you have. Chemical options should be used as a last resort, so let's keep those hoses nice and sharp. We're going to go to a set of pictures here for y'all.
Yep.
Fred, this individual is planting, he says, an insectary of marigold, zinnias, cosmos, and fennel. And he's noticed some, what he sent a picture of, and wanted to know whether
These
I
wouldn't
see
be
what
on.
looks-
Okay.
solid black honeybees and two other creatures in the attached photos. I think I know what the caterpillars are, but not sure about these other bugs. Can you identify?
Well, that's a stink bug, and by appearance, it's not a brown marmorated. It just looks like one of the common brown stink bugs. They feed on a variety of different plants and fruit, and they can be a bit of a problem. That would be what I would suspect on the tomato question that we just had, a brown stink bug. So that's what that one is. I think we saw earlier the swallowtail, black swallowtail caterpillars that are on the dill. And, again, those are not a big problem. I would just sort of let them live. Okay. If you need to, tap them off into some soapy water.
Okay, sounds good, Fred, thanks. Bill, can you tell the viewer what the name of this weed is and how to kill it? They live in North Lincoln.
All right. So we think that looks like nimblewill. It's kind of a feathery appearance. It looks a lot like that creeping bent grass that I showed at the beginning of the show. But this is a warm season grass, like our buffalo grass, Bermuda grass, or zoysia grass. And so the first time we get frost, it will go dormant and it will go really white. It is a perennial, so it's very difficult to kill. For control options, we really only have non-selective options like Roundup, and then we also now have the newer herbicides, mesotrione, tenacity. Again, will work. Multiple applications are required, and you want to do that actually a little bit earlier in the year. We're kind of getting late for that, so you want to put that down ASAP if you have a big issue with it. But you should expect to see it again next year because it is a perennial.
All right, thanks, Bill. This may be a pathology and a horticulture question, but we'll start off with you, Lauren. This is in Mapleton, Iowa. They have a couple of apple trees that are 13 years old, and one is thriving while the others have problems, and they can't figure out why. They talk about how they're planted, and they have not had problems in the last 13 years, but just wonder if the weather this year is to blame. And then finally, what is the best time to spray and prune these trees, which will go to you.
Okay.
Well, and actually all the fruits, except for this one, have that injury on top, which I tend to think is more environmental. This one, the way it's shriveling and there's some roughness on it, some of this I'm thinking maybe scab that we can see on apple would be one idea. In any event, and I sure want Kelly to chime in on some of the environmental stuff, but I would look into a regular fruit tree spray schedule if you're wanting to really produce high quality fruit and not have any disease or insect problems. And it really takes a really rigorous program to do that. You don't have to do it. You're just going to have less fruit, and you're going to have some, you might have some worms and things like that and you open the fruit. But
Sure,
you're still
some.
going to produce fruit. But if you really want to produce high quality fruit and not have any of those problems, you really want to get into a full spray schedule. And there's a lot of resources online that you can look at to figure that out. Do you think that's environmental, the top thing? It almost
You
looks
didn't think
like
it
a
was
scald
bitter rot? Just the fact that it was sunken, or it could have been hail damage. If it
They're
was
all
on the top and
That's
hail
what
hit.
threw me off was it was all on top. So.
Right, so possibly.
Okay.
But on the pruning, they wanted to know about pruning. The best time to prune apple is probably in March, late March, early April is the good time to prune apples. And apples bear fruit on fruiting spurs that can be up to 20 years old. So other than, doing some thinning, initially some training to get it to a nice shape and nice structure, you don't need to do a lot of pruning on apples. It's mainly a little bit of thinning here and there to allow more sunlight into the tree.
And we have one more picture for you,
Okay.
Kelly. They like rescuing old plants and give them a new place to live. They found this in their area and didn't know what it is. In the winter, it looks like a dormant grapevine, but in summer, it looks like these attached pictures. Okay. And I did notice that bugs really seem to like these.
Run.
Run.
Yeah.
It's a trumpet creeper or trumpet vine. Creeper might be a better name. It's Campsis radicans. And I've never looked up where radicans comes from, but radical would be a good term. They're a very rampant growing vine, and if you have it now, you found it in the area and you have it, you're probably going to have it forever. But they're a beautiful vine. The flower is very noticeable, and it is beautiful. It attracts hummingbirds, even butterflies, I believe,
Yep.
and
Sweet
it
spots.
has a lot of nectar, so it will attract. That's probably why there's some bugs on it that they mentioned. So, but it is a vine, as Lauren said. Run, if you have it, run, because otherwise it'll catch up and wrap around your ankles and knock you down. But to keep it in bounds, you just during the winter, you probably want to do some pruning, and then it won't be quite as aggressive.
And then it'll come up 10 foot away from wherever you got
That's
it.
yeah. Wherever you prune it, then it'll pop up someplace else.
Thanks, Kelly. We've got a couple of announcements tonight. The Midwest Tomato Fest, Saturday, August 22nd, 10 to 11:30 in Nemaha County 4-H building. And they are asking you to bring a couple of tomatoes along, and they're going to have a little taste testing. It's not a competition, but a couple of taste tests. And then Backyard Farmer at the State Fair, Wednesday, September 2nd, 4 to 5 p.m.